A black waitress lets 3 Hell's Angels eat for free, thinking it's just a small act of kindness. But the next morning, her world explodes. Her diner's been vandalized, her boss fires her, and everyone in town says it's her fault. Alone, broke, and heartbroken, she thinks kindness only made her life worse. Until the same bikers roar back into town with a secret that will change everything. They're not who she thought they were, and what they're about to do will test the meaning of faith, forgiveness, and what it really means to love your neighbor. But when hate strikes back, and everything she's built turns to ashes, can a single act of grace rebuild a whole town? Or will it burn everything down again? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The neon sign of Rosie's Diner buzzed and flickered against the darkening sky, casting an unsteady pink glow across the empty parking lot. Inside, Martha Lee moved with practiced grace between the worn booths, her comfortable shoes making soft squeaks against the checkered floor. The dinner rush had ended hours ago, leaving behind the familiar scent of coffee and French fries that had soaked into the walls over decades. Martha's hands, though tired, worked steadily as she wiped down the counter with circular motions. 20 years of the same routine had left her with an internal clock that knew exactly how many minutes remained until closing time. Each swipe of her cloth revealed her reflection in the weathered counter, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when she'd first started, but the same gentle determination in her gaze. The jukebox in the corner had gone quiet an hour ago, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of passing trucks on Route 66. From the kitchen, she could hear Cliff Dalton, the new owner, talking on his phone. His voice carried through the service window, sharp and dismissive. "Yeah, we need to update everything," he was saying. "Place looks like it's stuck in 1970. Got to cut some dead weight too, if you know what I mean." Martha's hand paused briefly on the counter, her heart sinking. She knew exactly who he meant by dead weight. She'd watched him eye her with barely concealed disdain since he'd inherited the place from his uncle 3 months ago. Where his uncle had valued loyalty and experience, Cliff saw only what he considered outdated and expendable. She resumed her wiping, humming softly, an old gospel tune her preacher husband used to love. The melody helped steady her nerves, just as it had through all the hard times since James had passed. 20 years felt like both forever and yesterday. The rumble of motorcycles cut through her thoughts. 3 massive bikes pulled into the lot, their headlights sweeping across the windows like searchlights. Martha heard a clatter from the kitchen as the cook, Tommy, dropped his spatula. "Oh, Lord," Tommy whispered, peering through the service window. "Hell's Angels. Nothing but trouble. Better tell them we're closed, Martha." The bikers' shadows loomed larger as they approached the door. They were intimidating figures, leather-clad giants with weathered faces and hard eyes. The lead rider's beard was streaked with gray, his vest covered in patches that spoke of miles and battles fought. Tommy disappeared into the back storage room, leaving Martha alone in the front. She could hear Cliff's voice fade as he too retreated deeper into the kitchen. The bell above the door chimed as the 3 men entered, bringing with them the smell of exhaust and leather. Martha straightened her apron and did what she'd done every day for 20 years. She smiled. "You boys hungry?" The question seemed to catch them off guard. The largest one, who had to be at least 6 feet 5 inches tall, exchanged glances with his companions. Their expressions shifted from guarded to uncertain. "Kitchen's about to close," the gray-bearded leader said gruffly, "and truth is, we're a little light on cash tonight." Martha's smile didn't waver. "Didn't ask about money or time. Asked if you were hungry." She grabbed 3 menus from behind the counter and gestured to the booth nearest the window. "Sit on down. Coffee's fresh, and I make sure the grill stays hot till we lock up." The 3 men hesitated, then followed her lead. Their heavy boots thumped against the floor as they settled into the vinyl seats. Martha noticed how they positioned themselves, the leader facing the door, the others with clear views of all exits. Old habits, she thought, remembering how James used to do the same thing after he came home from Vietnam. "I'm Martha," she said, setting down the menus. "What can I start you with?" "They call me Bear," the leader said, his voice softening slightly. "These are Tiny and Duke." He gestured to his companions, Tiny being ironically the smallest of the 3, though still substantial, and Duke a Latino man with careful eyes and calloused fingers that suggested years of guitar playing. "Coffee would be good," Bear added, almost tentatively, "if you're sure it's no trouble." Martha was already reaching for the coffee pot. "Trouble would be letting anyone leave here hungry." She poured 3 cups, the rich aroma rising between them. As she set them down, she noticed the way their hands curled around the warm mugs. Grateful, almost reverent. These weren't men used to kindness from strangers. From the kitchen, she could hear Cliff's agitated whispers. "Are you serious? You're actually serving them? They probably don't even have money to pay." Martha ignored him, focusing instead on her customers. "Now, our burgers are what we're known for, but the meatloaf tonight is fresh. Comes with mashed potatoes and green beans cooked the way my mama taught me." Duke's eyes lit up at the mention of meatloaf. "Been a while since I had a home-cooked meal like that." "Then that's settled," Martha said warmly. 3 meatloaf specials coming up." She wrote up the ticket and walked to the kitchen window, where Cliff stood with his arms crossed. "These orders need to go in," she said quietly but firmly. "And who's going to pay for them?" he demanded, keeping his voice low but sharp. Martha met his gaze steadily. "If it comes to that, you can take it out of my pay." She slipped the ticket onto the order wheel and spun it towards the kitchen, where Tommy had cautiously re-emerged. The cook glanced at the bikers, then at Martha, before sighing and firing up the grill. As she waited for the food, Martha kept the coffee flowing. The men remained mostly silent, but she noticed how the tension in their shoulders gradually eased. Duke's fingers tapped a gentle rhythm on the table, a musician's habit. Tiny's eyes kept drifting to the old photos on the wall, especially the one of James in his uniform that Martha kept near the register. When the food came out, she served it with the same care she showed all her customers. The plates were arranged just so, portions generous, everything piping hot. "Careful now," she cautioned. "Those plates are hot as Texas in July." The men ate slowly, savoring each bite. Martha caught Bear closing his eyes after the first taste of meatloaf, as if remembering something long forgotten. She busied herself with her closing tasks, giving them privacy but staying within easy reach if they needed anything. As the hour grew later, the parking lot outside grew darker. The men cleaned their plates completely, using the last bits of bread to soak up every drop of gravy. When they finally pushed their plates away, Bear cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he began. His voice rough with emotion he seemed unused to showing. "About the bill," Martha waved her hand. "Consider it taken care of." "We can't let you do that," Tiny protested, speaking up for the first time. "Already done," Martha said simply. "Sometimes a meal is more than just food. Sometimes it's a way of saying, 'You matter.'" She began gathering their plates. "My James, my late husband, he was a veteran too, Vietnam. I recognize the look of men who've seen too much and been shown too little kindness since." The 3 men stared at her, struck silent by her words, and the gentle knowing in her eyes. Finally, Bear stood up, reaching his full height. "Thank you," he said, the words carrying the weight of years of distrust and defensive walls being briefly lowered. They filed out quietly, their boots making less noise now than when they'd entered. The motorcycles roared to life in the parking lot, but before they pulled away, Martha saw Bear nod to her through the window, a gesture of respect that meant more than any payment could have. After they left, Martha locked the front door and began her final cleanup. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar motions while her mind wandered to James, wondering if somewhere out there someone had shown him the same kindness when he needed it. From his office, Cliff watched her with narrow eyes, his phone still in his hand. Martha paid him no mind. Instead, she finished her work, gathered her purse, and headed for the back door. In the quiet of the empty parking lot, she paused to look up at the stars. "Lord," she whispered, her words carrying on the night breeze, "let kindness count for something." The morning sun hadn't yet cleared the horizon when Martha woke to her usual gospel playlist. She hummed along to Amazing Grace while getting dressed, her movements unhurried and deliberate as she prepared for another day at Rosie's. 20 years of routine had shaped her morning ritual, a quiet prayer, a simple breakfast, and a gentle walk to work while the town still slept. But today would be different. The first hint came when she rounded the corner onto Main Street. Even from 2 blocks away, something looked wrong about the diner's familiar silhouette. Martha quickened her pace, her sensible shoes clicking against the sidewalk. As she drew closer, her steps faltered, then stopped completely. Angry red letters screamed across the diner's front windows. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. The racial slurs jumped out at her like physical blows, each letter dripping with hatred. Above them, sprayed in jagged strokes, were the words traitor and angel lover. Martha's legs trembled, but she forced herself forward. Her fingers brushed the cool glass where the ugly words marked their territory. 20 years of serving coffee, sharing smiles, and remembering everyone's favorite pie, all reduced to this moment of hate. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, setting down her purse and retrieving the cleaning supplies from beneath the counter. She'd just filled a bucket with soapy water when Cliff's car screeched into the parking lot. He burst through the door, his face twisted with rage. "Look what you did!" he shouted, gesturing wildly at the vandalized windows. "Look what your charity cases brought us!" Martha stood her ground, bucket in hand. "We don't know who did this, Cliff. Could have been anyone trying to stir up trouble." "Don't play dumb with me," his voice echoed off the empty tables. "You let those bikers in here last night. Trash brings more trash. That's how it works." "Those men were hungry and tired," Martha said quietly. "They didn't do this. There wasn't an ounce of hate in them, just weariness." "Save your Sunday school wisdom," Cliff sneered. He stalked behind the counter and yanked open the register. "You're done here. 20 years or not, I won't have someone working for me who can't tell the difference between customers and criminals." Martha set down her cleaning bucket, her movements measured despite the trembling in her hands. "Mr. Dalton, your uncle." "My uncle isn't here anymore." Cliff slammed the register shut. He pulled an envelope from his pocket and threw it at her feet. "There's your last check. Get out." The envelope skidded across the linoleum, stopping near her shoes. Martha looked at it for a long moment, then slowly reached down to pick it up. She untied her apron, the one she'd embroidered with tiny roses along the pocket, and folded it carefully. "I'll pray for whoever did this," she said softly. "And I'll pray for you too, Cliff." His laugh was bitter. "Prayers won't fix broken windows or pay bills. Get out before I call the police." Martha gathered her belongings, her purse, her small Bible worn smooth at the corners, a photo of James she kept in her locker. Each item felt heavier than usual as she placed them in her bag. At the door, she paused and looked back at the diner, at the counter she'd polished every morning, the booth where old Mr. Henderson had sat every Sunday for 15 years until he passed, the window where she'd watched countless sunsets paint the desert sky. The walk home seemed longer than usual. Dust from passing cars settled on her shoes as she trudged along the roadside. The morning heat was building, but the warmth couldn't touch the chill that had settled in her chest. Her mind kept circling back to the hateful words, to Cliff's anger, to the uncertain future stretching before her. When she reached her small house, she found Evelyn Carter waiting on her porch. Her neighbor's face was pinched with concern. "I heard what happened at the diner," Evelyn said, following Martha inside. "Whole town's talking about it already. What were you thinking, serving those kinds of people?" Martha filled her kettle and set it on the stove, going through the motions of making tea, though her appetite had vanished. "They were just people, Evelyn. Hungry people." "There's other diners," Evelyn insisted, settling into a kitchen chair. "Places more suited to their type. You should have known better, Martha. Now look what's happened." The kettle whistled, its sharp cry matching the pain in Martha's heart. She poured 2 cups before answering. "When James came back from Vietnam, not everyone welcomed him either. Some places wouldn't serve him. Some folks crossed the street when they saw him coming. The uniform didn't matter. They just saw what they wanted to see." "That was different," Evelyn protested weakly. "Was it?" Martha sat down, her hands curled around her teacup. "Hate is hate, Evelyn. It doesn't matter what excuse it wears." "Well, you can't fix hate," Evelyn sighed. "Best to just let it go. There's other jobs. Maybe the grocery store is hiring." Martha stared into her tea, watching the leaves swirl. The morning light filtered through her kitchen window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday, and yet everything had changed. "I don't know how I'll make rent," she admitted quietly. "I've got some savings, but—" Evelyn reached across the table and patted her hand. "You'll figure something out. You always do." They sat, in silence as the afternoon wore on, Evelyn eventually leaving with promises to bring over a casserole later. Martha remained at her kitchen table, watching the shadows lengthen across her floor. The Bible sat before her, open to the Psalms, but for once the familiar words offered little comfort. As the sun began its descent behind the distant mesas, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, a new sound cut through the evening quiet. At first it was just a low rumble, like distant thunder. But it grew louder, more distinct, the unmistakable sound of motorcycle engines. Martha lifted her head, listening as the rumble drew closer. She rose from her chair and moved to the window, drawn by something she couldn't name. The sound filled the air now, echoing off the adobe walls of her small house, calling to her like a summons. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, with only a few wispy clouds streaking the turquoise sky. Martha had barely slept, spending most of the night alternating between prayer and worry. She'd just finished making her morning coffee when the rumble of motorcycles shattered the desert quiet. Her heart jumped into her throat. Through her kitchen window, she watched 3 familiar bikes pull up in front of her modest trailer home. The machines gleamed in the morning sun, all chrome and polished metal, a stark contrast to her weathered yard with its scattered desert scrub and single stunted mesquite tree. Martha's hands trembled as she reached for the old broom propped by her back door. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it made her feel less vulnerable. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out onto her small porch, gripping the broom handle tightly. The 3 men killed their engines, and the sudden silence felt heavy. The leader, the largest of the three, swung his leg over his bike and removed his helmet. Martha blinked in surprise. In the harsh morning light, she could see his face clearly for the first time. Long silver hair fell past his shoulders, and though his leather vest and tattoos marked him as dangerous, his eyes were unexpectedly gentle. They reminded her of her James's eyes, tired but kind, carrying shadows of things seen and survived. "Ma'am," he said, his voice as gravelly as the road beneath his boots. "We owe you an apology for the trouble we brought to your door." Martha's grip on the broom loosened slightly. "You didn't bring that trouble," she said softly. "Hate brings its own kind of trouble." The man nodded, a sad smile touching his weathered face. "I'm Bear," he said, then gestured to his companions who were now removing their helmets too. "That's Tiny, though as you can see, the name's sort of a joke. And Duke?" Tiny, despite his name, stood well over 6 feet tall, while Duke was shorter, his dark features creased with laugh lines despite his serious expression. All three men carried themselves with a familiar bearing that Martha recognized instantly. The same straight-backed posture James had maintained until the day he died. "You're veterans," she said. It wasn't a question. Bear's eyebrows rose slightly. "Yes, ma'am? Marines? All three of us. Different wars, same scars." He paused, studying her face. "But you already knew that, didn't you?" Martha nodded, finally setting the broom aside. "My James was Marines too. Vietnam." She saw understanding flash in their eyes, followed by a deeper respect. "We heard what happened at the diner," Bear continued. "About you losing your job because of us. We came to make it right." "There's nothing to make right," Martha assured them. "I chose to serve you, and I'd do it again." Duke stepped forward, his voice soft with a slight Spanish accent. "Ladies like you, people who show kindness without asking questions, there aren't many left in this world. We can't let that light go out." Bear reached into his vest and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "We run a charity called Brothers of Grace," he explained. "We help veterans who've lost their way find purpose again. Mostly we fix up old buildings, turn them into something useful. Right now we're working on an old service station about 10 miles down the highway." Martha took the paper he offered. It was a worn brochure showing before and after photos of various renovation projects. She saw soup kitchens, homeless shelters, and what looked like community centers. "We've been looking for someone to run the cafe portion," Bear continued. "Someone who knows food, but more importantly, knows people. Someone who understands that sometimes a meal is more than just food. It's a lifeline." Martha's heart began to beat faster. "You're offering me a job?" Tiny spoke up for the first time, his deep voice surprisingly gentle. "More than that, ma'am. We're offering you a partnership. The place would be yours to run as you see fit. We provide the building and support. You provide the heart." Martha sank down onto her porch steps, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll at least come look at the place," Bear suggested. "No pressure. Just come see what we're building. What we could build together." A warm breeze rustled through the scrub brush, carrying with it the scent of sage and possibility. Martha closed her eyes, feeling that familiar whisper in her spirit, the same one that had urged her to serve these men that first night. "I have my car," she said slowly. "I could follow you out there." Bear's face broke into a genuine smile, transforming his entire appearance. "We'd be honored, ma'am. And please, bring that Bible I see on your kitchen table. Something tells me we're going to need all the guidance we can get." Martha felt tears pricking at her eyes, but these were different from yesterday's tears. These felt like hope. "Would tomorrow morning be all right? I need to pray about this first." Tomorrow's perfect, Bear assured her. He pulled out a business card with a hand-drawn map on the back. Service stations. Right here, can't miss it. Old Phillips 66 place with the big rusty sign out front. As the men prepared to leave, Duke turned back. Thank you again, Mrs. Lee. For the meal, yes, but more for showing us there's still good in this world. Martha watched them ride away, their bikes kicking up small clouds of dust that caught the morning light like glory. She looked down at the brochure in her hands, then up at the vast New Mexico sky. For the first time since being fired, she felt something stir in her chest, something that felt a lot like purpose. Thank you, Lord, she whispered, for showing me that when one door closes, you don't just open a window. Sometimes you open up the whole horizon. She turned and went back inside, already making mental lists of what she'd need to pack for tomorrow's visit. The broom stood forgotten by the door, no longer needed as a weapon, ready to be used for its proper purpose, helping sweep away the old to make room for something new. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert as Martha followed the rumble of motorcycles down Route 66. Her old Buick kept pace with Bear's group, kicking up clouds of red dust that danced in her rearview mirror. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, fighting down the butterflies in her stomach. Was she really doing this? Following a group of bikers out to some abandoned building in the middle of nowhere? But something in her spirit felt settled, like pieces clicking into place after years of confusion. She'd prayed all night about this decision, and the peace that followed told her she was on the right path. After about 15 minutes of driving, Bear's arm extended, signaling a turn onto a weather-beaten side road. That's when Martha saw it, the old Phillips 66 station, its rusted sign creaking in the breeze. Weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete, and sun-bleached paint peeled from the walls like old sunburn. But what caught her attention wasn't the building's decay. It was the life surrounding it. At least 20 people milled about the property, some carrying lumber, others scraping old paint from walls. A makeshift kitchen area had been set up under a canvas tarp, where an old woman with flame-red hair worked over a portable grill. As Martha parked her car, faces turned toward her with open curiosity. Bear dismounted his bike and walked over, offering his hand to help her out of the car. "Welcome to Grace Station," he said, his voice warm with pride. "It ain't much to look at yet, but give us time." "Grace Station?" Martha repeated, testing the name on her tongue. Bear nodded. Seemed fitting, considering how much of it we all need. A chorus of voices called out, "Miss Martha," as people noticed her arrival. She recognized some faces from Rosie's diner, truckers, drifters, and local characters she'd served over the years. They waved with genuine welcome, making her heart swell unexpectedly. The red-haired woman approached, wiping her hands on a worn apron. "Well, thank the Lord you're here," she declared. "I'm about to burn these poor souls' breakfast. I'm Reba, by the way, former biker's widow, current disaster in the kitchen." Martha couldn't help but smile at Reba's self-deprecating humor. "I'm sure it's not that bad." "Oh, honey, you're too kind. But trust me, these boys deserve better than my cooking. Doc over there's been trying to teach me, but I think he's about ready to give up." She pointed to a tall, lean man with wire-rimmed glasses, who was carefully turning sausages on the grill. He gave a slight wave and a knowing smile. Bear guided Martha through the crowd, introducing her to everyone. There was Tiny, who despite his name stood well over 6 feet tall, a gentle giant who specialized in electrical work. Duke, whose skilled hands could coax any engine back to life. Sarah, a young woman with haunted eyes who'd found refuge with the group after leaving an abusive relationship. Each person had a story. Each one carried visible and invisible scars, and each one greeted Martha with genuine warmth. "Most of us are veterans," Bear explained as they walked. Some struggled after coming home, found trouble instead of peace. Others are widows of servicemen, or folks who just needed a second chance. We help each other rebuild, both buildings and lives. Martha noticed how the group worked together with practiced efficiency, like a well-oiled machine. They moved with purpose, each person knowing their role. It reminded her of church suppers back home, where everyone pitched in without needing to be asked. "Would you like to help with lunch?" Reba called out hopefully. "These boys work better on full stomachs, and I'm afraid I'm about to poison them all." Martha found herself moving toward the makeshift kitchen before she could think twice. Her hands itched to work, to create something nurturing. She surveyed the supplies, simple ingredients, nothing fancy, but she could work with that. As she began to cook, the familiar rhythm of it settled her nerves. She hummed old gospel tunes under her breath as she worked, just as she had at Rosie's. The smell of properly seasoned food drew appreciative comments from the workers. "Now that's what I call cooking," Bear declared, inhaling deeply. "You feed us like a preacher preaches, Miss Martha, straight to the soul." Laughter rippled through the group, and Martha felt her cheeks warm at the praise. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed this, not just the cooking, but the joy of feeding people who appreciated it. The day passed in a blur of activity. Martha found herself swept up in the energy of the place, helping where she could, learning names and stories. As the sun began to set, the work gradually wound down. Someone built a campfire, and people began gathering around it, sharing coffee from thermoses and swapping tales. Martha sat between Reba and Doc, listening as stories flowed around the circle. Stories of war and loss, of addiction and recovery, of faith lost and found again. A young man named Tommy spoke of losing his brother in Afghanistan, his voice cracking. An older woman described how she'd found hope again after her husband's suicide. Bear shared about his own battle with alcohol and how helping others had saved him. The stories weren't all sad, though. There was laughter, too, and hope, so much hope it made Martha's heart ache. These people had been through hell, but they'd found their way back to life, to purpose, to each other. As night settled over the desert, someone produced a guitar. Soft music mixed with the crackle of the fire and the distant call of coyotes. Martha closed her eyes, feeling more at peace than she had in years. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, her prayer barely audible above the gentle conversations around her. "Thank you for new beginnings. Thank you for showing me that family comes in all forms, and that your grace finds us in the most unexpected places." The comfortable murmur of voices began to fade as people drifted off to their vehicles or sleeping bags. Martha felt her own exhaustion settling in, but it was a good tired, the kind that comes from meaningful work and genuine connection. As she drifted off to sleep in her reclined car seat, the soft rumble of idling motorcycles created a surprisingly soothing lullaby. Through half-closed eyes, she could see the stars scattered across the desert sky like diamonds on black velvet. The last thing she remembered was thinking how strange it was that she felt so safe here, surrounded by people society had labeled as outcasts, yet who had shown her more genuine kindness than she'd experienced in years. The motorcycles hummed their gentle song under the vast New Mexico sky, and Martha Lee, former waitress and newly discovered member of this unlikely family, slept peacefully among her newfound brothers and sisters, in grace. The desert dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as Martha pulled up to Grace Cafe in her old Buick. She'd fallen into a comfortable routine over the past few weeks, arriving early to start breakfast for the work crew. The abandoned service station was slowly transforming under their careful hands. Bear and his team had replaced the broken windows, cleared away decades of tumbleweeds, and given the building's weathered exterior a fresh coat of warm tan paint. The worn-out gas pumps still stood like sentinels out front, but now they'd been cleaned up and decorated with potted desert flowers, Reba's touch of beauty in the harsh landscape. Inside, Martha moved through her morning ritual with practiced grace. She tied her apron around her waist and pulled out the ingredients for her famous buttermilk biscuits. Her hands worked the dough as she hummed Amazing Grace, her voice carrying through the quiet morning air. "Nothing better than waking up to your singing, Miss Martha," Doc said, as he came through the back door, carrying fresh eggs from a local farm. His quiet presence had become a comfort to her during these early hours. "Lord knows these biscuits need all the blessing they can get," Martha replied with a smile, cutting the dough into perfect circles. As the sun climbed higher, more vehicles appeared on the horizon. Some were the familiar motorcycles of the work crew, but others were local cars, driving slowly past the cafe. Martha tried not to notice how they lingered, their faces pressed against car windows, staring at the activity around the building. "Just curious folks," Bear would say. But Martha saw the sneers, the way some drivers made a point of spitting in the dust near their property line. She heard the whispers at the grocery store about that biker camp and how it would bring trouble to their quiet town. One morning, Reba burst through the door, her red hair wild with anger. "You wouldn't believe what I just heard at the gas station. Those gossips at Miller's Market were saying we're running some kind of, well, I won't repeat what they said, but it wasn't Christian." Martha kept kneading her dough, pressing her frustrations into the soft mixture. "Let them talk, Reba. Actions speak louder than words." Bear spent that afternoon helping Martha design the cafe's menu. They sat at one of the newly installed tables, rescued from a restaurant that was closing down 2 towns over. Martha wrote out her recipes while Bear calculated costs. "Simple food, done right." Bear nodded approvingly. "Just like that first night at Rosie's." "We need to keep prices low," Martha insisted. "I want everyone to be able to eat here." Bear smiled and pulled out a hand-painted wooden sign he'd been working on. In bold, welcoming letters it read, "Everyone eats." "Already ahead of you," he said, his gruff voice softening. "This is going up right over the door." Martha felt tears prick at her eyes. "It's perfect, Bear. Just perfect." The bell over the door chimed. They'd salvaged it from an old church, and Reverend Harlan stepped inside. He looked uncomfortable in his pressed shirt and tie, so different from the work clothes and leather vests that usually filled the cafe. "Sister Martha," he said, removing his hat, "I wondered if we might talk." Martha wiped her hands on her apron and led him to a quiet corner. Bear watched from across the room, his presence protective but respectful. "I've known you since you first came to town with James," the Reverend began, referring to Martha's late husband. "You've always been a pillar of our congregation. But these men," he glanced around nervously, "they have dangerous reputations. People are talking." Martha folded her hands in her lap, looking directly into the pastor's concerned eyes. "Then they need kindness most, don't they, Reverend?" "It's not that simple," he started. "With all due respect," Martha interrupted gently, "it is that simple. Jesus didn't check reputations before breaking bread with people. He just loved them." The Reverend shifted in his seat, but Martha could see something working behind his eyes. Not quite acceptance, but perhaps curiosity. He looked around the cafe again, taking in the fresh paint, the clean floors, the neatly arranged tables. "These men," Martha continued, "they're veterans like James was. They're hurting, searching for purpose. Some made mistakes, yes, but they're trying to make things right. Isn't that what redemption is all about?" Reverend Harlan stood slowly, placing his hat back on his head. "You always did have a way of seeing the best in people, Sister Martha." He paused at the door, looking back. "Just be careful." After he left, Bear came over and put a gentle hand on Martha's shoulder. "You okay?" Martha nodded, watching through the window as the Reverend's car kicked up dust on the road. "He's a good man, just scared of what he doesn't understand yet." "Like most folks around here," Bear agreed. "Then we'll help them understand," Martha said firmly, standing up and straightening her apron. "One meal at a time." The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes in its golden light. Outside, motorcycles rumbled as more of the crew arrived for the evening shift. Martha could hear Reba laughing at one of Doc's quiet jokes and the steady rhythm of hammers as work continued on the back patio. She turned to the kitchen, ready to start dinner preparations. Her hands might have been weathered by years of work, but they were strong and sure as they moved through the familiar motions of cooking. As she worked, she hummed another hymn, letting its melody mix with the sounds of construction and conversation that filled the air around her. The "Everyone Eats" sign waited by the door, ready to be hung, its letters promising welcome to all who would come. Martha smiled, knowing that even if the town wasn't ready for them yet, they would keep doing what they knew was right, building something beautiful out of what others had abandoned, offering grace one plate at a time. The early morning sun painted the desert sky in shades of pink and gold as Martha unlocked Grace Cafe's front door. After 2 months of hard work, the transformation was complete. The once abandoned gas station now stood proud, its freshly painted walls gleaming white against the landscape. Flower boxes filled with hardy desert blooms lined the windows, and the hand-painted "Everyone Eats" sign hung prominently above the entrance. Martha paused in the doorway, taking it all in. The worn linoleum floors now shone with a warm patina, and mismatched chairs clustered around solid wooden tables gave the place a homey feel. Reba had hung curtains she'd sewn herself, their cheerful patterns adding splashes of color to the walls. "Morning, Miss Martha," Doc called out, pulling up on his motorcycle. He carried a guitar case strapped to his back. "Thought we might need some music today." Martha smiled warmly. "That's perfect, Doc. This is going to be a special day." The idea for Free Meal Sunday had come to her during morning prayers. "The Lord provides," she'd told Bear when she suggested it. "Let's pass that blessing on." Bear had agreed immediately, his weathered face lighting up. "Brothers of grace helping others find grace," he'd said. "Makes perfect sense." Now, as Martha fired up the stoves and began mixing biscuit dough, she heard more motorcycles rumbling in. The Brothers of Grace crew arrived early to help, carrying in extra chairs and setting up a buffet line with borrowed warming trays. "Word's getting around fast," Reba announced, tying on her apron. Her red hair was pulled back in a bandana. "I heard folks talking about it all the way in Gallup." Martha nodded, sliding trays of biscuits into the oven. "Then we'd better make plenty." By 10 o'clock, the parking lot was filling up. Dusty trucks and cars joined the rows of motorcycles. Truckers who'd heard about it on their CB radios pulled their big rigs onto the shoulder of the highway. A few weather-beaten men carrying backpacks trudged in from the direction of the railroad tracks, looking uncertain until they saw the "Everyone Eats" sign. "Come on in," Martha called out warmly. "There's plenty for everyone." The cafe filled with the aroma of fried chicken, beans simmered with ham hocks, and fresh-baked cornbread. Doc sat up in a corner, his fingers moving skillfully over guitar strings as he played old country gospel tunes. The music wrapped around conversations and laughter like a comfortable blanket. "Miss Martha," a gruff voice called from the buffet line. "These are the best dang biscuits I've had since my mama's." Martha looked up to see a weathered trucker with tears in his eyes. "Been on the road 3 weeks," he explained. "Forgot what home cooking tastes like." She squeezed his arm gently. "Well, you're home now, sugar. At least for today." Around noon, Martha noticed movement at the windows. Local townspeople were driving by slowly, some parking across the street to watch. A few gathered courage to venture inside, including Mrs. Peterson from the hardware store and Tom Jenkins, who ran the auto parts shop. "Coffee's fresh," Martha told them, pretending not to notice their hesitation. "And there's pie just coming out of the oven." They sat stiffly at first, but as the afternoon wore on, Martha saw Mrs. Peterson laughing at one of Bear's stories. Tom Jenkins was deep in conversation with Doc about vintage motorcycles. The day flowed by in a blur of serving, hugging, and listening to stories. A young woman who'd been hitchhiking west shared her dreams of becoming an artist. An elderly veteran told tales of his service that made other vets nod in understanding. Two teenagers who'd run away from home agreed to let Bear call their parents after Martha slipped them extra pieces of pie and gentle words about second chances. "This is what grace looks like," Reba said softly, watching the scene. "All these different folks, breaking bread together." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert, Bear called everyone outside. "Time for a picture," he announced. "Got to remember this day." They gathered under the glowing cafe sign. Bikers in leather vests, truckers in flannel shirts, drifters, locals, and the entire Brothers of Grace crew. Martha stood in the center, her apron still dusted with flour, Bear's solid presence beside her. Someone had brought an instant camera, and the flash caught them all mid-laugh. Later, as twilight painted the sky purple and the last guests reluctantly headed out, Bear raised a coffee cup. The remaining crew gathered around, tired but happy. "To Miss Martha," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You gave us back our reason to believe." Martha looked around at these faces that had become family. Reba wiping happy tears, Doc cradling his guitar, the Brothers of Grace crew leaning on each other like brothers truly do. For the first time since James had passed, her heart felt full and at peace. She belonged here, in this unlikely sanctuary of second chances and fresh starts. "To Grace," she replied softly, raising her own cup. "And to family." The desert wind carried the sound of their toast into the gathering night, while inside the cafe, the lights glowed warm and welcoming, a beacon of hope for all who might need it. The last rays of sunset had barely faded when they heard the roar of an engine. A pickup truck came speeding down the highway, its tires kicking up dust. Martha was washing dishes when she heard the first crash of breaking glass. "Go back inside!" Bear shouted as more bottles shattered against the building. "Get out of our town, trash!" voices yelled from the truck. The air filled with ugly slurs that made Martha's heart clench. Doc pulled her away from the windows as more bottles flew. The truck's engine revved, and cruel laughter mixed with the sound of squealing tires as it sped away into the darkness. "Everyone okay?" Bear called out, his voice tight with controlled anger. Reba was already sweeping up broken glass. "Nothing we can't fix," she said firmly, but her hands shook slightly. They worked in silence, cleaning up the mess. Martha found herself humming Amazing Grace under her breath, the way she always did when her spirit needed steadying. The next morning revealed the full extent of the damage. Spiderweb cracks spread across the front windows, and broken glass glittered in the dust. Bear and the crew arrived early, carrying tools and replacement panes. "Don't you worry none, Miss Martha," Doc said, measuring the windows. "We've fixed worse than this." But worry she did. Throughout the morning, cars drove by slowly, their occupants staring. Martha heard the whispers carried on the desert wind. That biker cafe, and bringing in all kinds of undesirables. By noon, the windows were fixed, but the mood remained heavy. Martha could see the tension in Bear's shoulders as he worked, in the way the other men kept scanning the road. "Maybe I should talk to Reverend Harlan," she said finally. "He might have some advice about handling this." Bear nodded slowly. "Want me to drive you?" "No, sugar. This is something I need to do myself." The church stood quiet in the afternoon heat. Martha found Reverend Harlan in his office, surrounded by papers and wearing reading glasses that made him look older than his years. "Martha," he said, gesturing to a chair. "I heard about what happened last night." She sat down, smoothing her skirt. "Then you know why I'm here." The Reverend removed his glasses, polishing them with a handkerchief. "Martha, you have to understand. People are concerned. These bikers, the drifters you're feeding, they're not the sort folks around here are comfortable with. They're God's children too, Reverend, just like everyone else." He sighed. "Of course they are. But you need to be careful. Don't provoke folks. Maybe limit your operating hours. Be more selective about who you serve." Martha felt disappointment settle in her chest. "That's not what grace is about, Reverend. Jesus didn't check credentials before breaking bread." "These aren't biblical times, Martha. Times are different now." She stood up slowly. "No, Reverend. People's hearts are different, and that's exactly why we need grace more than ever." The drive back to the cafe seemed longer than usual. The sun was setting when she pulled into the parking lot, casting long shadows across the desert. Bear sat on the front porch, 2 cups of coffee steaming beside him. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering her a cup as she settled into the chair next to him. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn purple. Finally, Bear spoke. "You know, when I came back from Nam, I couldn't sleep more than an hour at a time. Keep seeing their faces, my brothers who didn't make it home." Martha's hands tightened around her cup. James was the same way. The nightmares were so bad. "The PTSD?" Bear asked gently. She nodded. "That's what they called it later. Back then they just said he was adjusting. But he never really did. Started drinking to quiet the memories. Then his heart gave out one night, and I lost him." "When was that?" Bear's voice was soft. 1973, right after Christmas." Bear was quiet for a long moment. "I was there then. Same year, same war. Different unit, but same hell. Funny how life works. We might have crossed paths without knowing it." Martha looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe we did, in a way. Through all those boys you both tried to protect." The desert wind carried the smell of sage and cooling earth. In the distance, a coyote called, lonely and wild. "You remind me of our chaplain," Bear said finally. "He used to say that grace wasn't about deserving. It was about believing everyone was worth saving." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. "James used to say something similar. That's why I can't close the cafe, Bear. Can't turn folks away just because some people are scared of different." Bear's hand found hers in the growing darkness, rough and warm. "Then we won't. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." They sat there as stars began to appear, 2 souls connected by old wounds and new purpose, sharing the quiet strength of those who've learned that love is worth the risk of loss. The coffee grew cold in their cups, but neither seemed to notice. The desert night wrapped around them like a blanket, and for a moment, the weight of the day's troubles seemed lighter, carried by understanding hearts and the comfort of finding kindred spirits in unexpected places. The desert nights usually brought peace to Martha, but tonight was different. She woke suddenly, her heart pounding for no clear reason. The clock by her bed showed 3:15 in the morning. Something felt wrong. Then she smelled it. Smoke. Martha threw on her robe and rushed to her window. An orange glow lit up the night sky in the direction of Grace Cafe. Her hands shook as she dialed Bear's number. "Bear, the cafe. I think it's on fire." "I see it. I'm already on my way. Stay put, Martha." "Like hell I will," she muttered, already pulling on her clothes. She grabbed her keys and ran to her car. The drive that usually took 15 minutes seemed endless. As she crested the hill, her worst fears came true. Flames roared from the cafe's roof, reaching towards the stars like angry fingers. Bear's motorcycle was already there, along with several others from the crew. "Martha!" Bear shouted as she pulled up. "Stay back!" But Martha was already running toward the building. The heat hit her like a wall, and smoke stung her eyes. Through the haze, she could see Tiny, their gentlest crew member, breaking windows to vent the smoke. "The kitchen!" she cried. "We need to save the equipment!" "Too dangerous!" Bear caught her arm. "The roof's about to go!" A sharp bark cut through the crackling flames. Everyone froze. Inside the burning building, a dog was barking frantically. "It's that stray!" Reba shouted. "The one that's been hanging around!" Before anyone could stop him, Tiny charged through the front door. The flames were everywhere now, dancing along the walls they'd so carefully painted just months ago. "Tiny!" Bear's voice cracked with fear. "Get out of there!" Seconds stretched like hours. The roof groaned ominously. Then Tiny burst through the smoke, carrying a small brown dog. But as he cleared the doorway, a burning beam crashed down, catching him across the back and shoulders. Doc and Bear rushed forward, pulling Tiny clear. The big man's leather jacket was smoking, his exposed skin angry red with burns. The dog whimpered but seemed unhurt, pressing close to Tiny's chest. "Ambulance is coming," Doc said, already checking Tiny's burns with practiced hands. "These are bad, brother." Martha could only watch helplessly as the fire department finally arrived, their sirens wailing into the night. But it was too late. The roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending sparks spiraling into the dark sky. The firefighters focused on containing the blaze, preventing it from spreading to the desert brush around them. Hours passed. Martha knelt in the ashes as dawn painted the sky in pale pinks and golds. The cafe, their dream, their sanctuary, was gone. Charred timbers and twisted metal were all that remained. The sheriff arrived as the sun cleared the horizon, notepad in hand. "Looks like an electrical fire," he said, not meeting their eyes. "Old buildings, faulty wiring." "Bull," Bear growled. He was standing near what used to be the back wall, holding a partially burned plank. "Look at this." Martha walked over, her legs shaking. Burned into the wood were the words, "Not welcome," the letters crude but unmistakable. "Could have been done after the fire started," the sheriff said weakly. "You know better than that, Bill," Bear said quietly. "This was deliberate." The crew gathered around Martha and Bear as the sheriff drove away. Reba was crying softly, Doc's arm around her shoulders. The morning air still smelled of smoke and ash. Martha stared at the ruins of Grace Cafe. Everything they'd built together reduced to smoking rubble. Something inside her finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as she sank to her knees. "Maybe kindness don't change nothing," she whispered, her voice raw with grief. "Maybe they're right. Maybe we can't change hate." Bear knelt beside her in the ashes. He took her trembling hand and placed it over his heart. Through his shirt, she could feel its steady beating. "You changed me," he said simply. "Changed all of us, and that's worth everything." One by one, the crew gathered closer, forming a circle around Martha and Bear. The rising sun cast their long shadows across the burned ground, merging them into one. Above them, smoke still rose into the pale morning sky, carrying with it the ashes of their dreams, but not their hope. The little brown dog Tiny had saved limped over to Martha, pressing against her leg. Despite her tears, she reached down to stroke its singed fur. In the distance, they could hear the ambulance carrying Tiny to the hospital, its siren fading into the morning. The crew stood together in silence, watching the smoke rise. They were battered but not broken, their spirits scorched but not destroyed. The cafe was gone, but the family it had created remained, bound together by something stronger than hate could ever be. Doc finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "What do we do now?" Bear kept his hand over Martha's on his chest. "We rebuild," he said firmly. "We rebuild stronger." Martha looked at each face around her, these broken, beautiful souls who had become her family. The morning sun caught the tears on their cheeks, making them shine like diamonds in the ash. The smoke continued its slow rise into the brightening sky, carrying with it the end of one chapter and the unspoken promise of another. But that was a story for another day. For now they stood together in the ashes of their dream, holding on to each other and the belief that had brought them this far, that love, no matter how costly, was always worth the price. The morning after the fire, a heavy silence hung over the burned ruins of Grace Cafe. The crew gathered slowly, their boots crunching on charred wood and broken glass. Some sat on overturned buckets, others leaned against their parked motorcycles. No one seemed to know what to say. "Maybe it's time to move on," one of the younger riders muttered, kicking at a blackened timber. "Town's made it clear they don't want us here." Reba wrapped her arms around herself, her usual bright spirit dimmed. "I hate to say it, but he might be right. We could get hurt next time. Look what happened to Tiny." Doc nodded gravely. "Got word from the hospital. Tiny's gonna be okay, but those burns—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Fear hung in the air like the lingering smoke. Martha watched their defeated faces, something stirring deep in her soul. She thought of her late husband, how he'd faced his own battles with courage. Slowly she rose from the camp chair where she'd been sitting. "If hate can burn wood," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "then love can build stone." The crew looked up at her, surprise breaking through their despair. "We ain't finished here," Martha continued. "Not by a long shot. Them that did this? They're counting on us running scared. But I learned something from my husband. You don't win wars by retreating." Bear stood up beside her, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Miss Martha's right. We didn't come this far to give up now." Within an hour, they had a makeshift kitchen set up under a blue tarp. Reba and Doc drove into town, returning with donated supplies from sympathetic shopkeepers. Martha fired up a portable grill, and soon the smell of cooking food replaced the lingering scent of smoke. "Still feeding anybody who's hungry?" Martha announced, flipping hamburgers. "Ain't no fire gonna change that." Word spread quickly through social media. Someone had filmed the fire and posted Martha's story online. The black waitress who'd been fired for showing kindness to bikers, now feeding the homeless even after hate burned her cafe down. The video went viral. By afternoon, reporters from the local news station showed up. Martha kept cooking while Bear handled the interviews, explaining about Brothers of Grace and their mission to help veterans. The camera crews captured images of Martha serving plates to homeless veterans, truckers, and local families who'd come to show support. "This here's what Grace Cafe was always about," Martha told the reporters, her quiet dignity shining through. "Ain't about the building. It's about loving people when they need it most." Donations started appearing, first in small amounts through an online fundraising page someone set up, Then larger sums as the story spread. People drove from neighboring towns bringing supplies, tools, and offers to help rebuild. The biggest surprise came when Reverend Harlan's car pulled up to the site. He stepped out carrying 3 homemade pies, his face showing genuine remorse. "Martha," he said, setting the pies down carefully. "I've been doing a lot of praying since yesterday. The Lord's been working on my heart something fierce." Martha watched him cautiously. The crew tensed, remembering his earlier warnings about them. "I was wrong," the Reverend continued. "Dead wrong. I let fear and prejudice blind me to what you were really doing here. If you'll allow it, I'd like to organize a town fundraiser to help rebuild." The crew exchanged stunned looks. Bear stepped forward, studying the preacher's face. "Why the change of heart?" he asked. "Because last night, watching that fire, I realized I'd forgotten what Jesus actually taught us," Reverend Harlan replied. "He didn't tell us to judge people. He told us to love them, and that's exactly what you've been doing here all along." Martha wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to the Reverend. Without a word, she hugged him. After a moment's hesitation, he hugged her back. "Them pies smell like peach," she said, pulling away with a smile. "Your favorite, if I remember right," he nodded. "My wife baked them this morning. She wants to help too." One by one, the crew members came forward to shake the Reverend's hand. The tension dissolved into something new, hope, tentative but real. "Well," Doc said, reaching for a pie, "reckon we better sample these while we plan this fundraiser." As they gathered around to share the pies, Martha looked at the unlikely family around her. Bikers, veterans, a preacher, all brought together by something stronger than the hatred that had tried to tear them apart. The ruins of Grace Cafe still smoldered behind them, but already she could see something new rising from the ashes. The transformation of Grace Cafe seemed nothing short of miraculous. Week after week, donations poured in from every direction. Martha would check the online fundraising page each morning, her eyes widening at the growing numbers. People from all 50 states had seen their story and opened their hearts. Tools arrived first. Hammers, saws, and drills packed carefully in boxes with notes of encouragement. Then came the lumber, stacked high on flatbed trucks. Veterans rode in on rumbling motorcycles from Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico, their leather vests decorated with service patches. They worked alongside the Brothers of Grace, raising walls under the hot desert sun. One morning, Martha discovered a mountain of building supplies outside the construction site: premium paint, windows, and roofing materials. The local hardware store's price tags were still attached, but no note explained who left them. Doc noticed Mr. Peterson, the store owner who'd once cursed at them from his truck, watching from across the street. When their eyes met, the man quickly looked away and drove off. "Lord works in mysterious ways," Martha murmured, running her hand along the fresh lumber. The new cafe took shape, rising taller and prouder than before. They chose bright, welcoming colors for the walls and installed large windows that let in streams of desert light. Reba hung curtains she'd sewn herself, while Duke and his fellow veterans carefully installed the flooring. Before they hung the last of the interior fixtures, Martha gathered everyone in a circle. She held her worn Bible close to her heart and led them in prayer, her voice strong and clear in the sunlit room. Bear helped her mount a handcrafted wooden cross above the counter, a gift from Reverend Harlan's congregation. That evening, Martha and Bear walked the perimeter of the building together. The desert stars spread across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Martha paused, looking up at the twinkling lights. "Funny," she said softly. "You never know which meal God will bless." Bear's gentle laugh rumbled in his chest. "Guess he blessed 3 bikers and a waitress." Reopening day dawned bright and clear. By 10 o'clock in the morning, vehicles of every description filled the newly paved parking lot of Grace Cafe. Gleaming Harleys stood next to dusty pickup trucks and sleek sedans. The mayor's polished SUV was parked right beside Bear's weathered motorcycle. Martha stood in her pristine new kitchen, arranging fresh-baked biscuits on serving trays. Her hands trembled slightly as she heard the murmur of the crowd outside. Through the windows, she could see the unlikely mixture of people, leather-clad bikers mingling with church ladies in their Sunday best, ranchers in worn boots standing near business folks in pressed shirts. Reverend Harlan led the gathering in prayer, while the mayor shifted uncomfortably beside him. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Just as Martha stepped forward to serve the first plate of food, movement near the back of the crowd caught her eye. A man limped forward slowly, his mechanic's uniform stained with grease, and his head bowed low. Martha recognized him as Roy Sanders, who ran the auto shop on the edge of town. His work-roughened hands clutched a wrinkled envelope, and tears streaked his weathered face. "Miss Martha," he choked out, his voice breaking, "I got something to say." The crowd fell silent as death. "I'm the one who burned your cafe. I was scared and stupid and full of hate." He thrust the envelope toward her with shaking hands. "My boy was hungry once, during that big storm last year, and you gave him food. I didn't deserve your mercy then, and I sure don't deserve it now." Martha looked at Roy's trembling form, then reached out and took his calloused hand in both of hers. "Grace fed me when I didn't deserve it, either," she said softly, but clear enough for all to hear. Tears flowed freely as Martha pulled Roy into a tight embrace, showing everyone what true forgiveness looked like. Bear watched from nearby, pride and emotion making his eyes shine bright. 6 months after reopening day, Grace Cafe had become more than just a restaurant. It was a living testament to the power of forgiveness. Sunlight streamed through spotless windows, catching the dozens of framed photographs that covered the walls like a patchwork quilt of humanity. There were snapshots of grizzled veterans sharing meals with suited businessmen, travelers from every corner of the country, and local families breaking bread together. The cafe's signature gold lettering proclaimed "Everyone Eats" across the main wall, gleaming like a beacon of hope. The words had become more than just a motto. They were a promise kept every single day. Sunday afternoons had transformed into something sacred. The parking lot would fill with everything from Harley-Davidsons to minivans, and the smell of Martha's cooking would draw people from miles around. Reverend Harlan, who once warned Martha about dangerous reputations, now chose to hold his evening blessings right there among the coffee cups and pie plates instead of in his church. One quiet evening, as the desert sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Martha sat at the counter beside Bear. Steam rose from their coffee cups as they watched the last customers of the day gather their belongings. "You think folks will ever stop being surprised by kindness?" Martha asked, her voice soft with wonder. Bear's weathered face crinkled into a smile. "Not if you keep serving it, Miss Martha." She laughed gently, the sound mixing with the familiar hum of the neon sign outside, the same sound she'd heard at Rosie's Diner all those months ago. But now that hum carried something different. The steady heartbeat of hope, beating strong and sure in the desert night. The cafe glowed like a lighthouse in the gathering darkness, its windows warm with welcome, its doors open to all who needed a place to belong. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.